one of the things I really wanted to do is I want to get this down to the practical level. I want to be able to take this back to our audience and who we want to share this with, and I want to share with them some of the things that I feel like I was gifted with at school that have really changed the way that we've run our entire business, changed our speaking, changed our writing in the books that we're working on, and changed the filming that we're doing. So there are some foundational things that we learned at school that I wanted you to talk a little bit about, because I think a lot of people they're ready to make these changes, but they don't really know where to begin. So talk to us a little bit about non-dual consciousness and what it takes for us to get there.
Okay, so the normal way the Western mind works, I don't think native peoples operated this way. We've got a completely different mind. Is that when a new event, situation, person, or idea approaches you, to gain control of it, you do this automatically. You don't know you're doing it. You divide the field of the moment, the new idea, into what you're already familiar with and what you're not familiar with, and everybody probably does that. What threatens you, what doesn't threaten you. But the trouble is we jump to a further stage, and we call that which we're familiar with and doesn't threaten us true, or right, or good. That which does threaten us, or is outside of our experience, or our education, or our ethnic class system, we call it untrue or wrong, you see. That's the basis of dualistic thinking. And within a nanosecond of your mind doing that, watch yourself do this. It's automatic. You do choose sides. You almost automatically, men are better than women. You're just trained to think that way. Whites are better than blacks. Straights are better than gays, whatever it might be. Until you rewire that pattern and see how deep that pattern is. So it becomes this practical. I'm glad you made me move toward the practical. Now that's what the Eastern religions were much better at, especially Buddhism. They insisted on practices. Now actually we had them more in early Christianity, things like pilgrimage, walking meditation, the Camino that people go on now.
Santiago.
That you had to not just say things or verbalize things, but you had to have body actions. You've all seen Catholics do this. That's a body prayer. Do you understand it? There's some things I can only know in my body, that the life of the Trinity is flowing through me. Do you understand? Now, I don't know how many Catholics even experience that, but you've got to know that goes back to the early periods of Christianity. Everything had to be expressed by bow, prostration, kneeling. The body had to speak its truth. Those were practices that now we can prove actually rewire this. And until you rewire this, your thinking doesn't change. Just because you heard a sermon, that does not mean your thinking change. And do we need much proof of that? I mean, how many sermons are given every day or every Sunday in America? Is America a high-level consciousness? I don't think so as a culture. Because we all think that just by hearing a sermon, but even when we hear the sermon, we sit there either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. And we leave completely smug and content, either that we totally agreed or we totally disagreed. Both are poor positions, you understand, to totally surrender to it 100% or even to fight it. How about hanging in the middle? So that's contemplation.
So once we recognize that the first step is recognizing it, is being the witness and seeing, I'm a dualistic thinker, which is basically all of us.
Observing, yes.
So we do that and we recognize it, and then we say, okay, I recognize it, now I need to shift it.
And you have to even be humiliated by how constant it is.
It's embarrassing.
How judgmental it makes you, how stupid it makes you, how critical it makes you.
You say something about contemplation, you're going back to eat your own vomit, like a dog eating its own. It's
in this Proverbs,
So then we move to a contemplative stance, or we try to, and what does that look like?
So you have to practice not letting your mind play that game. To not divide the field of the moment. Let the whole event, person, idea come toward you without labeling it up or down, in or out. Do I like it or do I not like it? That will take you years
And how
to
do
learn
you
how to stop doing that.
how do you start?
You have to be humiliated by the intensity of it,
Okay.
how deeply dualistic you are. I think this is what our medieval saints meant by weeping over their sins. That was a common phrase. I wept over my sins. We say, oh, that's a little dramatic. But once you see, I can't go 5 minutes without dissing something. To see that you're a constant cynic,
Right.
that you're a continuous skeptic, that you're an accuser, which is satanic, the way we defined it earlier. You've got to suffer that humiliation deeply.
Okay.
That will give you the motivation to stop going there
Okay.
and to begin some kind of prayer practice, meditation practice. So those fancy words, meditation, contemplation, prayer, was supposed to be this, where I didn't go back to this vomit. I'm not going to waste any more time in this constant negativity. It's become my whole pair of glasses. It's the only way I see. So that's why the tradition, both in the East and the West, used a common phrase. They called it third eye thinking, recognizing I see everything in terms of either or. And you see this even painted on the forehead in India. You've been there perhaps, you know. That was originally a sign of an enlightened person, you know, that I don't do this anymore, I do this, all right? I look in this synthetic, integrated, holistic way. I don't divide the field of the moment. But don't think, even if you agree with what I'm saying right now, which I sort of hope you do on some level, but even if you agree with it, doesn't mean it's accomplished. You have to practice it for years. I'm in my 75th year. I'm still recognizing how I do it, especially in moments of stress or fear or anxiety or humiliation. When I'm insecure, I'll revert to dualistic thinking. Oh, dang it. You know? But now I see myself do it, and I can't get away with it. That's the I still do
So
it.
at least you recognize it,
That's it.
and then you can say, okay, I'm doing it.
I'm doing it. Now that begins the process of disidentification. As soon as you see your patterns, you've begun to retreat from them. Just begun. But until you see it,
Right.
you are identified with it. I mean, we have certain politicians, I won't name names, who cannot see that they're doing the exact thing they're accusing their enemy of. The exact thing.
Yeah.
Identical. You know
Right.
what I'm talking about.
Right.
That means the ego is totally identified with itself. There is no distance between the self and reality. I have pulled reality into myself.
Right.
So there's no reference point beyond me.
What does your contemplative practice look like?
I wake up, that's one reason it's been so wonderful to write here this month, because it's very quiet here in the morning. I wake up and I do have to admit I come down to get my cup of coffee to get these things going.
That makes me feel better. So do I.
Yeah, I'm just sort of dopey at the beginning. But within 10 minutes, in fact, I've been sitting in that chair right there and looking out here each morning. And I do that until my screen clears out. I'm not obsessive anything. I'm not repetitive, preoccupied anything.
And you're sitting with a quiet, empty mind.
Just
receptive.
letting go of anything that tries to grab me.
Okay.
Letting go of anything that tries to say, think about me, feel this, resent that. You know, even the problem-solving mode, which most of us tend to be good at. And I'm a problem solver too. But once that takes over, like once I start looking at emails,
Right.
I'm in trouble because I'll move into the problem-solving mode.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So you have to leave the field an open horizon.
Okay.
It was you or Cynthia that shared about a sister that said, I'm so bad at meditation because I thought about 1,000 different things. Who was, can you share that story again?
That's actually from Thomas Keating. Cynthia and I both quote him on that. He's the wonderful Cistercian monk in Snowmass, Colorado. I'm going to see him in a few weeks. He's 94 now.
Wow.
And he says, whenever you confess to him, oh, Father, I had 1,000 distractions, from naked ladies to resentments toward it. He says, wonderful, 1,000 chances to return to God. You know? So there's no such thing as negative energy. Every oppositional movement is an opportunity to re-choose the positive.
Oh, that's so good.
It's so brilliant.
That's
It's
so
brilliant.
good. Yeah.
You're indestructible now.
Mm-hmm.
See, when I went to the Franciscans at the tender age of 19, we were made to think we could get rid of our negative, lustful, resentful thoughts. Get rid of them, boys. Get rid of them. Oh, God. And it's like telling a boy, don't think of an elephant. Well, of course, that's what you think of. It's useless. And the greater practitioners, both in East and West, never taught that. But once we got back into dualistic thinking, Christianity largely became a matter of willpower. The one with the greatest willpower wins. This isn't willpower. This is recognition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is illumination. This is awareness. This is consciousness. You know, our English word consciousness comes from I had to study Latin and Greek. Conscire, which means to know, shire, with, to know with. So true consciousness is a communal knowing. It's not Richard's private knowing. It's Richard falling into a shared knowing. So for me to write well, I have to drop there, or I can't write. Well, I might say some words. But if I'm moving at that deeper level, now that level of pure consciousness, shared knowing, is what we mean by wisdom. It's the intuitive mind can have access to that, not the rational mind. Rational mind cannot access that level. Can't.
So to be intuitive, you found through your own practice and teaching of others that
That's right.
that
I got
has
off
to.
your question.
That's
Sorry.
okay. But that has to happen. We have to have some contemplative form of living that takes us from me to we.
Excellent. And lets you recognize that so much that you call I is a very egocentric, small I. It's too self-referential. It's too self-preoccupied. It's too self-maintaining. So yeah, you have to be pulled out of that reference point.
Okay.
That's first conversion. When that Jesus line for this, for the scripture, is John 12:24. Unless the single grain of wheat die, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it can die, if you can let go of that shell, which every seed has to do to become a plant, of course, it will bear much fruit. There it is. I mean, that's like from a Buddhist, from Jesus. But most Christians are running to Buddhism because no one told them we had this in Christianity too, but we never taught it very well in the West. So it has to become a practice whereby I little by little loosen my grip on myself. Or the ego's grip on me, however you want to see it.
And your identification.
And your identification.
With your story, your ideas,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah.
Can this be achieved without suffering?
It almost never is. Why would any of us give up our control tower if we don't have to? I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't.
No.
It's forced on you. That's why it's the cross. It's always unjust suffering, undeserved discomfort. And your ego mind will find 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't have to suffer this.
And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Oh, it is.
Or certainly for me, so it must be for everybody.
Everybody.
You mean I need to welcome suffering in order to be able to get to a higher state of consciousness, enlightenment, non-dualistic thinking?
Yeah.
I don't want to suffer.
Yeah.
But this is part of where we were talking about earlier, redefining suffering. So integrating the negative. So can you talk a little, because I think once we've witnessed our dualistic thinking, we've witnessed that we've identified with everything, we've decided to try and take a more contemplative stance, we start seeing the world out of the third eye and seeing that that we're all connected, that others matter as much as we do. Then we need to move it into the heart. But then I think it's a reshifting our paradigm. We talked about this a lot in school, to, well, I'm going to, like, our Western world wants to stop suffering immediately.
Yeah.
Drink, drugs, sex, shopping, television, movies, novels, it's anything. How do we, and I think this is a major shift that we need to be making towards accepting suffering, or maybe it's not even accepting suffering, but redefining suffering as something that isn't negative. But you talk a lot about integrating the negative and how important that is.
Not just, let me restate that.
Okay.
Much of it is, no, you said it right, is integrating the negative. That is suffering. To integrate the problem and instead of dismissing it or excluding it.
Okay.
It amounts to an increased capacity for ambiguity, an increased capacity to tolerate paradox, to tolerate conflict, that's suffering though, do you understand? Don't make it laying on a bed of nails.
Okay.
But just, okay, this restaurant, that baby's crying in the corner, I'm sure you'd understand that as a mother. I could get upset about that, but I could say, that's humanity. That's part of the deal. A crying baby in my restaurant isn't the end of the world.
Right.
But if we don't start with little sufferings like that, how will we ever deal with the bigger ones? But let's just define it that way. Integrating the negative is what it comes down to. For instead of expelling and excluding the problem always. Now we call that third way thinking, nonviolent thinking, if you will, non-dual thinking, contemplative thinking. But we were taught that perfection is to exclude imperfection. Divine perfection, it's called forgiveness, by the way, is precisely the ability to include imperfection. That's perfection. That's divine perfection.
Yeah.
Including the mistake, the flaw. That's forgiveness. That's why God is the forgiver in chief. God has no trouble forgiving reality, or God wouldn't be God. Or this wouldn't be going on.
Right.
Everything here is falling apart, is imperfect. I know it doesn't look like it in this kind of neighborhood, but it is.
Let's unpack the unforgiveness piece a little bit more, because I think that's something that a lot of people really struggle with. So once we've reached the state, you've done some beautiful teachings for us about forgiveness and what it actually is a release for us of. Why is it so important as we enter into this new consciousness that we're able to understand forgiveness?
Well, let's start with divine forgiveness. Every time God forgives you, and God always forgives you as soon as you're ready to receive it. It's a reciprocal concept. As soon as the catcher's mitt is here, the ball is already thrown. But every time God forgives you, God is saying, I prefer a relationship with you, Tasha, to being right. Every time you forgive your husband, that's what you're saying. I would sooner have a relationship with you, Erik, than stand over here in my righteousness, even though I do know I'm right. But you're willing to let go of that, do you see? So to stand over here in your righteousness is a recipe for long-term unhappiness in you, for him, for the whole situation. But the ego likes to sit in that cold, righteous position. Normally, until you've experienced being forgiven yourself for something you did do wrong, and someone was kind enough and gracious enough to let you out of it, to graciously forgive you. You don't know how to do it. I think this is why parents have to teach this to children. Yes, I give the law, and I normally expect you to obey the law, but okay, it didn't happen. How can we work through this? You know? I want a relationship with you more than just being the righteous parent.
So I think this is coming up right now in politics. It comes up in religion. It comes up in families that disagree on just theology in general. What are some of the ways that you've seen that it's actually working in this new contemplative stance? Or what would be an example? How do you talk to somebody who has completely different views on you politically?
You know, to be perfectly honest, complete cross-level conversation. When people, you know, in the school I teach you the levels of consciousness, right? Someone with a completely different set of assumptions at the postmodern green level than someone to be at the blue traditional level.
Right.
complete cross-level conversation is largely useless.
Okay.
I hate to start so pessimistic.
I've tried
Yeah,
and it doesn't work, so I
it's
understand
'cause
that.
the assumptions are all different.
Right.
about
You're
what life-
coming from two
complete
completely different
world-
places.
yeah,
Right.
worlds. So normally what you have to do is, and this is going to sound so naive and so simplistic, is show kindness and respect, while still calmly stating your truth. Now the way I like to do that is indirectly, by not taking the person on, but usually by some indirect placing of a little bit of doubt or a little bit of lack of solidarity with what they said. I will often say, well, I have to think about that. I'm not sure of that. You understand? They know what I'm saying. They do know I don't agree with what they just said. But
Right.
once you confront the ego only solidifies.
Right.
The ego only constricts. Because this is America today. And this is as true on the left as the right. This is humiliating for us to admit. But both of us have to love.
Or it's not going to work. So, but in eager to love, you talk about coming to is it the edge of the inside?
The edge of the inside.
So if we're going to try to change our institutions, our healthcare system, the penal system, our economic system, politics, as in this new consciousness, where do we begin? Where do we go to the edge of the inside? Because things need to shift.
Yes. Well, you don't want to go outside, become so rebellious, or so dig in your heels in your little conservative enclave that you can't talk to anybody. That's why I call the prophetic change position the edge of the inside.
Okay.
You have to earn your right to speak inside of your white Republican family or whatever it might be, all right? By showing love, showing respect, showing up for the family dinner or whatever it might be. Is there a way? There has to be a way for both speaking your truth calmly and gently and still planting seeds of good doubt. Planting seeds of good doubt by not buying in to the racist remark, but still letting them know you're not naive. It's I think what Jesus means by being, gentle as doves but wise as serpents. It's a wonderful metaphor Jesus used. How do you show you're not naive? You know the political landscape, you know the field, but you're not going to resort to quick anti-anybody statements.
Right.
I'm not going to move toward the negative. I've resolved the negative in here, and I'm not going to go there. And you're not going to bait me into it either.
Right.
So there is a holding your ground. Now, wise people will know what you're doing. They're going to hate you for it because they want to bait you.
And you won't play.
And you won't play. Yeah, and you won't play. It's, I think this is what Jesus means when he says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. At that point, both the conservatives and the liberals will be disappointed in you. Both of them.
Right.
This is third way thinking.
Right.
Both groups feel you're not paying your dues to the right side. And that's why I have to say, progressive, green level, liberal thinking can be just as dualistic, just as needy of being argumentative and winning.
Right.
Still wanting a win-lose worldview.
Being right in their independence, in their non-identification.
cynicism,
Right. Right.
Cynicism as my philosophy.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
postmodernism is described as the denying of all universal truth claims. There are no universal truth claims.
Which is where so many of our kids are today.
Oh, almost the whole millennial generation. They don't realize they picked that up almost naturally if you grew up in the last 20 years.
Why do you think that?
Well, it's the underlying philosophy of America is postmodernism. We live in a postmodern culture.
Okay.
And part of the reason is because my generation grew up with modernism. Modernism thought that reason and logic and dualistic, kill the Nazis, kill the communists,
Right.
Would solve the problem, and then it didn't. All the problems even became worse, but just in more subtle ways. So when dualistic modernism did not solve our problems, we descended into, there are no truth claims.
Right.
Except one. The one I just stated. There's one universal truth claim that there are no universal truth claims. That's the Achilles heel.
And that's
of
very
postmodernism.
disorienting for those of us who want order, who want
Yes,
certainty,
yes,
where
yes,
you're
yes,
talking
yes.
about
Yeah.
ambiguity, the ability to embrace
Yeah.
ambiguity and uncertainty and the cloud of unknowing.
Cloud
The
of unknowing.
cloud of
Yeah.
unknowing
is
and holding the
where
tension.
Maybe spirituality or relationship with God needs to start, or needs to go to.
This is where the young person loves living in box 2.
Right.
Dismissing everybody else as stupid, medieval, religious, Christian, Catholic, whatever. They'll find some criteria by which to dismiss you. And they don't realize what arrogance that is. And why they have to have the humility to go back to box 1. Not that to completely buy box 1, but to say, you know, there were some really good elements in box 1. Really good.
The logic and order serve
Yeah.
a very important purpose.
And religion's metaphors might have been taken too literally, too dogmatically, but they were magnificent intuitions about the shape of reality. And science is now becoming our best friend. I have a whole chapter on this in my new book, how again and again what religion intuited and said in metaphorical language, now science is affirming in things like black holes and infinite space and quantum theory. And I mean, again and again, science is our friend. Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
I watched in a crowd of 2,000 when you start talking about, God and the Big Bang Theory, and just watch everyone kind of shuffling their sheets. And I'm not sure, but that's not my story of creation. Is actually 4,000 years ago, and Adam and Eve, and I watched that, and I grew up with creationism, so it was I hear it when you say Big Bang Theory and this, and so. That's just interesting to me to be including that kind of yes and transcend and include, and you can still reach the kingdom of God regardless whether you believe in creationism or the Big Bang Theory. They're ideas on how things started, and science is moving towards this Big Bang Theory actually has a lot of credibility to it, and it doesn't disclude creation at all.
At all. Let there be light.
Yeah.
The third verse of the Bible is the Big Bang. There it is. It's just how you're going to define that, you know? And as if God needed our protection, you know? Evangelicals think we got to protect God. I don't think God needs our protection. Do you understand? God needs to reveal the mystery. I'm in my new book, I'm calling the Big Bang the Great Radiance. The beginning of God radiating outward, do you understand? But it's still entirely God-based. So it's a classic, it is almost, in the last century, the classic example of dualistic thinking overtaking theology. Creationists and evolutionists. A problem that should never have existed. It's a non-problem. God creates things that create themselves. That's obvious. That's evident. That's the entire known universe. God creates things that continue to unfold from within. We call it photosynthesis.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Right.
But we so, in our dualistic mind, considered rational scientists our enemies, that we could not hear. They were using different metaphors for the same thing.
I have one more question, and then we should do the lightning round of like 4 questions that we have. I want to talk a little bit about what the conference that we just got back from, and so just going a little bit into the divine dance. What most of us see God, if we were brought up in the United States, as an angry God.
Isn't that terrible?
It's terrible, and
I know.
you said something. I don't want to teach my boys about the God that I was brought up with if I don't even think that I necessarily believe in that God anymore. So can we talk a little bit about the God that we've been taught versus the God that you believe? Because if people can't even define God in a way that they're open to, they're not even going to listen to this conversation at all.
Well, where do I start? So you read my last book, The Divine Dance. The Divine Dance is a metaphor owned by the fathers of the church in the 3rd century to define the shape of God. It took them 3 centuries to make sense out of the language in the 4 Gospels, particularly John's Gospel, that talked about Father being God, Son being God, Spirit being God. They seemed interchangeable, they seemed different, they seemed connected, yet they seemed separate. I mean, listen to all the lines. They're just gobbledygook lines if you're not interested in theology. You know, a lot of people just glaze over when you read John's Gospel. So admit it took them a while, but they finally came up with, this is the shape of God. The Greek word was perichoresis. Peri means around, periphery. Choresis, choreography, to dance around. I'm not making this up. This is Orthodox, Catholic, Christian. No Christian worth his salt would deny this. It's in the entire Christian tradition. God is a circle dance. Huh? The oldest agreed upon statement about the shape of God. Now I want to give you a visual image, because it's hard. How could God be a circle dance, you know? Picture, and this is one of our Franciscan mystics, St. Bonaventure. He said, picture a water wheel of 3 buckets, outpouring, emptying into the other, emptying out, knowing they can empty out because they will be immediately infilled. Huh? And this is the shape of God, infinitely in one direction for all eternity. Okay? Until you can picture that, you can't get the doctrine of the Trinity. Therefore, any language, any notion of God as being wrathful is theologically impossible. There's no backsplash in God. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
But see, we didn't start with a Trinitarian notion of God. Most Christians did. We started with a monarchical notion of God, which basically was Zeus or Santa Claus. And these are people who think they're bona fide Christians. Now, I'm not making a judgment on how good they are. I'm sure they're better people than I am. But their notion of God is largely pagan. You understand? It's an old white man with a white beard sitting on a throne, throwing thunderbolts down at people he doesn't like. Now, I have to admit, a lot of the early stage books of the Bible, Kings, Joshua, Judges, even Exodus, even Noah, did God really drown all the women and children on the whole earth to save one man and one woman and their animals? I mean, if you're going to take Noah literally, you've got to believe that.
Right.
You've got an incoherent universe after the 4th chapter of Genesis.
Abraham and Isaac, another, right?
Incoherence. It's not a safe universe if God is this kind of whimsical, tyrannical, even, I'm going to use the word, sadistic God. I mean, I could list, most people don't even read the passages where God is just thrashing. And then we have Jesus, people who don't like him. We have Jesus come along telling us to forgive 70 times 7, but God doesn't. We have Jesus telling us to love our enemies, but you know what? Well, we've already been so poisoned by all these earlier stories that those stories from Jesus just go right. No one really loves their enemies. Come on, Jesus. Be honest. No one really forgives 70 times 7. We made the gospel impossible to believe, not taken seriously. He might as well not have said it. Tell me in Christian history where Christians have been known for loving their enemies. Tell me. It doesn't exist. Maybe a Quaker person here or there, you know, or a Mennonite, but certainly not we Catholics and Episcopalians and Baptists. Because we were all identified with power. Once you're identified with power, you're identified with winning. You were with the American Empire, you with the English Empire, me with the Roman Empire. All the same problem. You understand? It's not starting in the cross position, the powerless position. So we got to redefine the shape of God to reform Christianity. And that's why if people start with your rewire this to understand, let me put it this way. You've heard me say it. God is much more a verb than a noun. Now, if you think that's heresy, try Acts 17. God is the one in whom we live and move and have our very being. Paul's first sermon on the Areopagus in Athens. You know? God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. God is an action verb. God is not a substantial noun, and certainly not male, and certainly not white-skinned, no gender at all.
No long beard.
No long
no
beard.
cane that casts wrath.
And this is so emblazoned in most people's psyche, starting in the first grade in Sunday school, that it's very hard to dislodge. And it basically took the form, don't be surprised, of Santa Claus.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating. Making a list, checking it twice, gonna find out who's naughty or nice, happens to always be white, and always has a nice white beard.
Always be
and he sits
male.
on a chair, and he's always male, sitting on a chair. At least he hugs children, but he gives coal to bad children. It's all so theologically unworkable. It's unworkable. It's absurd. It's not good Christian theology. Let me maybe pull it together with this, and I'm not trying to be outrageous, I'm trying to be honest. We are still in early Christianity. 2,000 years after Jesus, we're still at the baby level. We really are.
And we need
except for the mystics and saints who go all the way.
We need to unwind or unwrap a lot of these false pagans, ideologies, logics that we've created that have almost been barriers to the love of God.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a major unpacking and
Major
unlearning,
unpacking.
which takes the non-dual thinking, the second stage consciousness, the third eye. We have to be able to go outside of our identification to be able to do
And
that.
also can only maybe be accessed through suffering, through great
You're not going to
loss.
let go of your dualistic, retributive worldview without suffering.
Unless you have to.
Until you know one time down I deserve suffering, and someone chose not to give it to me anyway. Then the floods of grace are open. You have to be loved unconditionally by somebody once in your life, or you cannot understand the gospel. You cannot understand God.
That's like the anti-motivational speech.
Very good from you. That makes sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, we must all suffer if we're going to move forward in advance as a culture and become more human.
And to soften that for them, so because they're going to think you're a masochist, taking away their pleasure, just an increased capacity for ambiguity, increased capacity to hold anxiety, an increased capacity for paradox. Use words like that, so they don't think you're telling them to lay on a bed of nails.
Right.
You understand?
Right.
Just practice the next time. I've been in a lot of them. You have to the next canceled flight line. And say, okay, I can be miserable the next 45 minutes, or I can, and I only pass this test half of the time, but at least I can see I'm doing it. Do you understand?
At least you're observing.
And all my irritation at this long line is not going to help it speed up one bit.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Because we live in a necessarily imperfect world. I think it's the struggle with imperfection that teaches us what true perfection is. So I think there has to be pushback. And we see this in the entire physical universe. There's the flow and there's the anti-flow. And in that conflict, we move to higher levels. Okay.
Wow, good job.
But it's true.
I'm so impressed.
Why, and we sort of answered this, we'll give it again in a bullet point. Why does God allow suffering? Like, why does he allow so much pain in the world?
That one's harder for me to answer because I have to first plead ignorance. I don't know, especially such horrific, totally undeserved, unjust suffering. I can see why, at least for Christians, that our logo became a suffering man, a crucified man dying on a cross, almost as if God was trying to name God's solidarity with that suffering. So I don't have a rational answer, but I do know that people who can believe in that divine solidarity with them have found a way through it. That's all I can say. But it never pleases or fully satisfies the rational mind. It still will always feel unjust and wrong. That's the suffering of suffering, that it's unjust, that I didn't deserve this. And so we have our God-man figure, Jesus, holding to the nth degree unjust suffering. And so I think this was not paying any price to open the gates of heaven. I think it was a statement about God's solidarity with every act of human suffering, starting with Cain's killing of Abel till right now. That only feeds the soul. It doesn't feed the rational mind, but it does feed the soul.
I like how you answered that open. This wasn't a glib or pat response, or this is why we suffer, because people who are suffering can't receive that. If they're in suffering, they're like,
doesn't work.
That's all they feel.
Yes.
John,
I have one.
Go.
Is that okay? Do you believe that there is a literal heaven and a literal hell?
I believe we have to logically posit eternal life, and therefore there has to be an eternal death.
Yes.
Or you're not free. You have to be free not to choose eternal life. But it seems the very nature of the universe is there's the same amount of atoms in the world as there were 3 seconds after the Big Bang. I know some people don't like the Big Bang, but nothing dies. So there's a lot of evidence for eternal life. The resurrection of Jesus is not a one-time anomaly. So I'm trying to get to your question. Don't make them geographical places as much. And our Pope, Pope John Paul II, said this. When will Catholics realize heaven and hell are not geographical places? They're states of consciousness, all right? But states of consciousness have eternal being to them. Now, what does that mean? We don't know. Paul says that. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard what eternal being is. But there's a lot of evidence that life lasts forever. Life is eternal. Our entrance way into that is the word love. Only one letter difference in English. Love seems to be the portal into life. But you have to be free not to choose love. And that's called hell. Now, a lot of our Catholic mystics said no one, when they finally see infinite love, will be able to resist it. That's why we posited this strange thing that you Protestants didn't like, called purgatory. I know we made it look like a geographical place, but if you've spent your whole life selfish and deceitful, and you see infinite love, I don't know what happens to you, but it's got to be an immense purgation that you wasted 70 years of life being an antichrist when you could have served Christ.
Right.
So that's your hell.
Right. Like C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
Yeah, it's the Great Divorce.
Yeah.
Sure. So, not geographical places, but eternal states of consciousness. And I mean, what 2 of our St. Teresa's both said, they said, oh yeah, I believe in hell. They had to present their Orthodox credentials. But then both of them said, but I don't think anybody's there.
I remember at a conference, I think it was you and Rob, the reason that the Bible says, and maybe I'm misquoting this from my Protestant background, but every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, is that because there is no one, when they're looking in the face of eternal love, including Hitler, including all of the people that we think are bad, is going to be able to turn away. Like eventually, every single one of God's creatures is going to turn towards love.
You and me
love
too.
wins.
Love wins.
Love wins.
There's no evidence for saying anything else. Our God isn't much of a God. God doesn't lose.
Right. God doesn't. Right. I love that.
John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life. My logical mind tells me that that is a very exclusive avenue that must be checked into the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah. Well, Jesus in the other 3 Gospels doesn't walk around talking that way at all. That's only in John's Gospel. I just finished a book on this, and I'm not going to give you the whole book, but it's on the universal Christ. John's Gospel is not Jesus of Nazareth speaking. It's the risen and universal Christ speaking, making universal declarations about the nature of reality. And as long as I know that, I have no trouble with that line. I can understand the Christ who is talking about the eternal shape of reality. There are people who know the Christ under many different names. There's people who live in this reign of love, and I've met them in India who are Hindus, and I met them in Thailand and they're Buddhists, and they put us to shame in their love of their neighbor and their love of the planet and their love of the poor. And Christians sometimes who don't love any of the above, but they make that verbal statement. They think they've surrendered to Christ. I don't think so. All right? So Christ is a corporate personality. The reason I entitled my next book, The Universal Christ, is to try to make that case. That's going to be a 200-page book, so I can't give you all of that, but believe me, the case can easily be made. But most of us were never told that, even though it should be self-evident. Almost none of the stories in John's Gospel are found anywhere else. This is a different level of revelation, you understand? This is not Jesus of Nazareth. It's the risen Christ who existed from all eternity, which is said in Colossians, Ephesians, the prologue to John's Gospel. The Christ is different than Jesus. Jesus became the Christ. I'm not denying that. Jesus revealed the Christ. I'm not denying that. So I believe in Jesus Christ. But the trouble is, most Christians grew up thinking Christ was Jesus' last name. All right? And they so lumped them together that they ended up with a tiny little Jesus and not a cosmic Christ.
And that Jesus only lived for 33 years, 2017 years ago, and now.
Yeah.
How about I am the way, the truth, and the light.
Same
no
problem.
man comes to the Father
John
but through me.
14:6. Yeah. Whenever you have Jesus talking in an exclusionary, imperialistic way, you know that's not Jesus talking. That's the eternal Christ mystery talking. And on that level, it's true. You know? Did it ever strike you, the God-man figure in Hinduism is called Krishna? Read the life of Krishna, the hidden Christ of Hinduism, 5,000 years before. This mystery of divinity and humanity coming together in matter and spirit has popped up in all of history. Now, I'm not denying, and my Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church will say, we believe, so I'm paying my Orthodox credentials, we believe Jesus is the Word of God. But our Council of the Church officially teaches that does not mean there are not other words of God. Why do we need to think dualistically? Now, I know passages like John 14:6 lend themselves to that, which is no surprise that came to your mind. But it's extremely problematic because it only appeals to people who want to exclude and want to feel they're superior to other people. When you don't have that need, let me just leave it at that. It will not be your favorite passage. I'm not going to throw it out, but I'm not going to start with that. That is not invitational. It's not compassionate. It's not Jesus, actually. Jesus doesn't talk that way. Jesus is always, including the outsider, the non-Jew, the sinner, the heretic. So we have two different Jesuses. The Jesus before the resurrection, who is very inclusive and non-patriarchal and inclusive. Then the Jesus that seems to be revealed in John's Gospel. And John's Gospel is my favorite, so don't think I'm throwing it out. But I know I'm reading the Christ there, not Jesus. That's why the stories are completely different stories. You find me one story in John's Gospel that's in the other three, directly. There's a few that appear to overlap.
Wow.
But none of them are the same story.
Wow.
Because it's a different Jesus.
It's the cosmic Christ.
It's the cosmic Christ, yeah.